think it'll be a great season for Ferrari, and I think they're going to win the Constructors' Championship.
Hello everybody and welcome back to another not applicable Formula 1 video. I hope that you're well. We saw McLaren versus Ferrari on the track in 2021. Today I bring you McLaren versus Ferrari on YouTube. That's right, we have got CFRacing on the channel, and I have to say, first and foremost, it was an absolute pleasure to have him on. We talked everything Ferrari from last season, a few seasons back actually, and also looking into the future for 2022 for the team. We talked Charles Leclerc, Carlos Sainz, Mick Schumacher, even George Russell along the way too. It was a wonderful conversation, and here is how it went. 2021 for Ferrari was like a mixed bag in my opinion. I'd love to get your opinion on it from a Ferrari fan's perspective, because at times I thought they were maybe falling off a little bit. At times they felt really, really unlucky, and then towards the end of the season, just massively shot up and just completely made third place their own, and McLaren were never ever going to catch them.
Yeah, well, after Russia and Monza, I really thought there was no shot at Ferrari coming third in like the Constructors' Championship or anything. Like we saw in Monza, like 1-2 from McLaren, they put a massive point gap over like Ferrari, and I was like, oh well, fourth is good. I mean, it's better than fifth and sixth in the year before. But then it was fantastic what they did at the end of the year. Like they got the new engine upgrade. I assume that maybe what like boosted the like confidence of the drivers along with actually performance as well, and I guess that helped them get third in the actual constructor standings. But McLaren did get very unlucky in the third half of the season. Like I know Lando had like what 2 or 3 punctures in the last like 4 or 5 races, which sucked. He was running like really good in Abu Dhabi. He had a puncture I believe in Qatar as well. So, I mean, if those didn't happen, I think McLaren would have been a lot closer. But I think it's more of just the consistency of both the Ferrari drivers, how Leclerc pretty much finished most P4s, I think, out of everybody all season. And just Carlos Sainz finishing even higher than Leclerc in the driver's standings just really boosted them up. But yeah, it was a great season. I enjoyed watching it. I would have liked a win, obviously, like Silverstone. That would have been fantastic. But it was still, I was okay with the season. Next year, we'll win the Constructors' Championship, though.
Yeah, I think for me, it was the Lando Norris obviously missing out in Russia, and I think fairly like even over the course of the season between him and Leclerc. Like I think of, the Silverstone almost for Leclerc as almost comparable to the Russia almost for Lando Norris. Like those two seemed really on a par. And then Carlos Sainz just absolutely came out of nowhere and just started picking up podium after podium after podium. And if you're Charles Leclerc, that's got to hurt a little bit because, Monaco, who was on pole, Baku, who was on pole, Silverstone, It looked like he was going to win a race. And then suddenly Carlos Sainz has beaten you in the Drivers' Championship over the course of the season.
Yeah. I mean, as you guys know, I'm a massive Leclerc fan. Like, I have him to win the World Championship this year. I mean, I'm biased, obviously. So I guess, that's just how it is. But yeah, he had a great season. I would say he was probably like one of the most unlucky drivers of the year, but I'm biased, so take that with what you want. But like, Monaco, he could have probably got 25 points if he started maybe 18, 15. It really depends. Maybe finish first, second, or third. Hungary once as well. Like once again, Hungary just got taken out by your boy Lance Stroll over there. Turn 1 that gave Carlos Sainz a podium. I think, yeah, he got P3 that race with Vettel's disqualification. But then Carlos Sainz had a bunch of great races. Like Leclerc, he didn't get points in Russia. Sainz gets a podium. In the final race in Abu Dhabi, Sainz gets a podium. Leclerc gets like 1 or 2. So I guess Sainz did a really good job at like picking up the pieces in more of the carnage races. And then Leclerc just did really good all season, getting 4th when every other driver just has a good race as well, like Perez, Bottas, Verstappen, and Hamilton, obviously. When all those guys get good races, Leclerc gets 4th. But whenever something happens, he seems to be in like the mix of it. So I don't really know what I'm trying to ramble on here, but that's what I'm trying to say. Like, got unlucky, but
point. I'd forgotten about Hungary as well, actually. Yeah, I forgot that he was involved in the Lance Stroll. Like, everyone talks about the Bottas, obviously, with hitting Lando Norris and Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez. But then, everyone kind of forgets that Lance Stroll did the same thing, like 3 cars back, too. And
he
took out another
Ricardo
chunk of
and
the
Leclerc,
field.
I think.
But yeah, as you say, like Carlos Sainz was there in all of the races that ended with a little bit of controversy or carnage. He was able to pick up those podiums, whereas Charles Leclerc was involved in a lot of the carnage a lot of the time.
Yeah, poor guy.
They ended up pretty similar on points though, and I think, as you said, Charles Leclerc on the mix of the entire season probably should have ended up slightly above Carlos Sainz. I think Carlos Sainz
agree.
picked up those little points here and there. And that sort of moves into 2022 then, because I think that's going to be the big talking point for Ferrari. And it reminds me almost of 2014 when we had massive regulation changes. Alonso and Kimi were at Ferrari at the time, and then they were sort of bringing in Sebastian Vettel as well, and that was sort of being talked about more and more and more. And then Vettel comes in 2015, finishes third, Kimi finishes fourth, but they're not quite anywhere near Mercedes. Then we have another big rule change in 2017. Vettel ends up finishing second that season. 2022, another big rule change. Ferrari seem to get better when there's a rule change from these standings. 2014, 2017, they looked better and better. Is 2022 finally the year, and what's going to be the difference in 2022 compared to those years before?
Well, I think 2022 is going to be the year. But if you ask some McLaren fans, they think 2022 is going to be the year. You ask Alpine fans, 2022 is going to be the year. You ask Haas fans, probably not, but 2022 is going to be the year. So, I mean, in my opinion, I think 2022 is going to be the year. Granted, completely biased Ferrari fan over here, but I feel like there's just something different than what happens in like 2017 and 2018, because like in 2016 going into 2017, like Mercedes was still by far like the fastest car. So they had like pretty much all season to work on the next year's regulation. So yeah, 2022 is, I think it's a lot different. Like obviously like the whole ground effect thing is completely new since like what, the 70s or 80s, I believe. Maybe that little bit of experience could help Ferrari maybe perform a little better, along with like the drivers as well, because the drivers is the biggest like performing factor besides the car. And I mean, we saw how good Leclerc and Sainz were. I think they're the best driver pairing last year, and I think going into 2022 they're also going to be the best driver pairing, because I think Russell's just a little bit of an unknown right now into Mercedes. Like I think he'll do well, but I want it to be proven, So I think the combination of actually knowing like about the ground effects, along with the fact that the drivers are just like really good, I think it'll be a great season for Ferrari, and I think they're going to win the Constructors Championship.
I think I agree. Like I've said last season, during 2021, I absolutely love the combination of Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz. And I also agree with you. I think in terms of driver pairings moving into the next season, they are by far and away the best combination on the grid. But then I was actually looking back at it, and in 2014, it was Alonso, who was a two-time world champion, and Kimi Räikkönen, who'd won a world championship. And then obviously in 2017, it was Sebastian Vettel, who's a four-time world champion. So realistically, if you're looking on past performances, even though I agree with you in that this is an amazing lineup of drivers, it doesn't quite have the same caliber of the drivers in the past. Does that worry you a little bit?
No, not at all. We've seen like Carlos Sainz jump from team to team to team and even build up team to team. Like he pretty much helped, him and Lando built McLaren back up to where they kind of are right now. And we've seen Charles just be good. So like he's won everywhere, like F2, F3, F4, he's won everything. And I think the Ferrari like development team is like a lot better than it was. And going into 2014 season, going into the 2017 season, they've split up their departments in multiple ways. Like I believe they have like a performance department now, and they have a bunch of other ones, like aero chassis engineering, all those other things. And I think it's just managed a lot better than it was back in those days than it was. I think it was Arriva Bene back then. Now it's Binotto, but I think right now it is better than it was before. And I just think they're going to take that step forward. I just got a gut feeling. It's really hard to tell who's going to win, of course, but it's just my gut feeling.
It's one of those things, whenever there's a new regulation change, there's always an opportunity for all those teams to really find something. And I think, especially because we had that Brawn season, as far away as that feels now, it kind of gives this light to all Formula One teams that you can come out of nowhere. And if you just find one thing which can really click for you, then you can win a championship in Formula One, even if it is just a one-off like we had in Brawn. Which obviously then went on to become Mercedes and become a lot more dominant. But if Ferrari are good this year, do you think it's something that they can carry forward over the course of the season? Or do you think it will be a little bit of a one-off? They'll find something that maybe the other teams don't find, but then over the course of this sort of next generation, the next 5 or 6 years, it's maybe not quite a Ferrari generation?
It's hard to tell because we don't know if there's going to be like special regulation changes that maybe hamper one team or another. Like just say a team just by far dominates these regulations, then maybe the FIA will introduce something to like, bring them back a little bit because, they want like competition. But I feel like a lot of teams will have very similar pace next year. Like I think the cars will be different for every team. Like we've seen so far with the McLarens and even Aston Martins, like they're using the same engine, but like the whole engine cover and the whole side pods are completely different for both cars. So I think all the teams are going to be very similar. And I don't think there's going to be like another sort of like dominance like we had with Mercedes. I think there'll be other teams up there. Like, last year we had Red Bull and Mercedes, which is a great title fight. I thoroughly enjoyed it. But if there was to be a team that were to, continue to regulations and just dominate for a whole season or even 5, I guess, I mean, I would be completely okay with Ferrari did that. They did it in the early 2000s. I wouldn't be surprised if Mercedes did it or Red Bull did it, even McLaren as well. Like all those teams are proven to actually have periods of dominance in Formula One. So I don't see why they can't do it again, but I just don't think it'll happen. I think the FIA will do something to make sure there's not one team dominating.
Especially with the new ownership of Formula One, it does feel like, well, as we saw last year, maybe a little bit controversially at times, they do like the entertainment value. They love the cars being close to one another. They love the cars, battling for various different things at various different races. Sticking with Ferrari then and thinking about the future, Mick Schumacher staying at Haas. I did just want to quickly get your opinion on that. Him staying at Haas, whether or not there's a Ferrari seat for him in the future. Out of the two, Leclerc or Sainz, which one it would be that would have to move out of the way for him?
I mean, it has to be Sainz, right? Like Leclerc signed up for the team till 2025. So I love Charles and I like Carlos as well. But I mean, if Sainz just keeps performing, like I don't see a reason to move him. But if Mick is like absolutely dominating in that not the Alfa Romeo, the Haas, like maybe like Leclerc did in 2018 in that Alfa Romeo, then I guess that kind of warrants a promotion. But if Sainz is still on par with Leclerc, there's really no like plan in moving him.
Do you think Mick Schumacher needs a stepping stone between Haas and Ferrari though? Like, do you think Haas are actually gonna offer him that opportunity to really show his ability and learn actually how Formula One works? Because it feels like when he was at the back of the grid last year, as much as he got laps under his belt and experience in the car, it felt like he didn't really get experience of Formula One, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I was thinking of this actually last night. I'm like, what would happen if just say, Haas suck, obviously, but if Alfa Romeo has a decent car, what if they switch like Mick and like Guang Yu Zhou or something? I think it would be really cool if Mick goes to Alfa Romeo and then I mean Haas can take both monies from like China and Russia and move Guang Yu Zhou over to Haas. I think that'll be cool. But I don't know how Alfa Romeo will like that if they lose all that China money, but who knows?
Yeah, it's very true, isn't it? And especially towards that sort of middling pack / back of the grid, there's so much politics involved, and it's so tricky to know where drivers are going to go and what's going to happen. I feel like that's maybe the luxury that we don't quite see at the top of the grid a lot of the time. Like Mercedes don't really have to worry about pay drivers and that kind of thing.
No, they
Neither
don't.
Red Bull, Ferrari, which is quite a weird thing to take into consideration for those guys at the back of the grid. Moving it back to this season, Charles Leclerc versus Carlos Sainz. I think you've sort of nailed your flag to the Charles Leclerc post, which is fair enough. But do you think it's going to be close between the two of them? Where can you see the two of them coming in the Drivers' Championship? Do you think Carlos Sainz is going to still be able to keep up with Charles Leclerc? Or do you think we're going to see a little bit more of a gap between the two?
Well, if you saw my driver predictions, like my way too early driver predictions for 2022, that really have no value towards them because we haven't seen anything from these cars so far. I had Leclerc at 1 and I had Carlos Sainz at 4th. And I do think they will be close. And I have Hamilton and Verstappen in between the two. I do think they'll be close. I think Ferrari will have the best car. And the way I put Leclerc in front of Carlos Sainz is just based off of qualifying. And because we know Leclerc is probably one of, if not the best qualifier on the grid. Like I'd say it's probably like Max, Charles, Lewis, or you can intertwine any of those guys. And we saw last year, Leclerc was like qualifying up into like P3, P4 sometimes. Sainz was sometimes down in 6th, sometimes 5th, really right behind him. And I think if Leclerc, sometimes if he qualifies in pole, he can keep pole like we saw Monza and Spa back in the day. We saw him in F2 in very equal cars just dominate everybody. So I think the qualifying will be a big difference. And I don't know if Carlos Sainz has that like maximum potential qualifying pace that can get him up there to Leclerc. I know he did it at the end of last year, which is really good, and I'm very impressed with what Carlos Sainz is able to do. But I think if Leclerc has a car that can get pole like we saw in 2019, he's going to get it and he's going to win some races.
Yeah, I suppose you're right. If you can qualify further up, it makes the races a whole lot easier for yourself to do. Like,
yep.
That always reminds me of Sebastian Vettel in the Red Bull, where he'd literally just qualify on pole and easily win the race, because once you give yourself that margin at the front, it's so hard for those other teams to catch up with you. I think the other thing with that, though, is we have introduced another incredibly good qualifier to one of those top teams in George Russell. Do you think George Russell could cause Leclerc some issues in terms of qualifying? Because that is kind of his thing, being Mr. Saturday.
Yeah, I think he will actually. Maybe at the beginning of the season, probably not. Like he'll get he's got to get used to like being in a top team and stuff. But honestly, I think it'll maybe take him like 2 to 3 races, and he'll just be on par with like even Hamilton at that. Like, I think I honestly, like a bold prediction, I've said this before, I think George Russell might even out-qualify Lewis throughout an entire season.
I think if George Russell can really get this car going, we'll see him do some really, really fun things in that Mercedes car. Final question I've got for you. Max Verstappen, Lando Norris, George Russell, and Charles Leclerc. The 4 drivers, in my opinion, that sort of iterate this new generation of Formula One. How would you rank them over the next 5 years?
Ooh, bold. That is bold. Oh God, I gotta take some bias out of this. So throughout 5 years, so I guess we're going from 2022 to 2026 or something, 2027. So I gotta give Max number 1. I think the Red Bull will probably do really well. It's very hard to tell, just because also he does have like the accolades already, like he's a world champion. Number 2, for sure, I have Leclerc. I think he'll probably be the second best driver. He'll probably win a championship in his career. Number 3, I have George Russell. And number 4, I have Lando Norris. I'm sorry, McLaren fans. I'm so sorry. I don't have the faith in McLaren. Like, it's nothing with Lando. I just don't have faith in McLaren.
I'm sure that will start some conversations in the comments down below, to be fair. I know I've got a pretty big Lando following, mainly because I'm a McLaren fan as well. So
I do too. Don't worry.
As I said, I'm sure that will get you guys talking in the comments down below. Those 4 drivers then, Max Verstappen, Lando Norris, George Russell, and Charles Leclerc. How do you rate those 4 over the next 5 years? Get your predictions down in the comments below, as well as your predictions on how Ferrari will get on in 2022. Looks like a very big season for them next year. And now all I have to do is say thank you again to CFRacing for coming on. We ended up talking for like over an hour. I've tried to condense it down as much as I possibly could, but it was an absolute pleasure to have him on. Check out his channel in the description down below too. Whilst you're there, subscribe to this channel, leave a like if you enjoyed this video, and I will see you next time.